Hey guys, welcome back to Learn Python the Hard Way. In this exercise 13, we're going to take a look at parameters, unpacking, and variables. As always, you're going to find the link to the current exercise in the description below. This chapter is part of the paid section of the book, so if you don't have the book, feel free to just follow along with the video. So in this exercise, we will build on top of what we did in the previous exercises. In this exercise, actually, we are going to work with modules. And we're going to pass in some command line arguments. So what is an argument? What we already saw in the previous exercises is that when we entered Python 3 or Python 3.6 space, and then the name of the Python file that we want to execute, that we passed in after the version of Python that specific file name. And that's what's called an argument that we're using when we are executing our file, for example. So let's get started by typing out this particular code file here. And as always, I have my terminal open. You can open that if you're using a Mac, for instance, by pressing Command and space key and then typing out terminal. So previously we created a folder here, and now we can get started by opening a new code file. And I'm using Visual Studio Code here. So I'm going to type out code space and then the name of the file. We're going to work on exercise 13. So let's call it x13.py for Python and confirm. And this is going to open a new Python file. And from here, let's get started by, first of all, importing argv from the sys module here. All right, next we're going to define three different variables. Script first, second, third. Assigning it to argv, and then we're going to print out 4 different lines. And after the print statement here, we're going to insert the variables. Let's type that correctly. All right. And finally, we print out your third variable as, and we follow it up with the third argument here. All right. So here, just to explain the code, on the first line, we are using an import to import an external library from to our script from the Python feature set. So this helps us to keep our program small by not providing all capabilities, all functionalities within Python itself. So our programs can still load quickly and there's not too much space required, but we are still able to, of course, incorporate additional capabilities by using those kind of import statements. So argv is the argument variable, which we're importing here, a standard name in programming, which is also used in many other languages. And this variable holds the arguments that you pass to your Python script when you run it. So for example, if we take a look again at what we did before, if we ran a code, we, for example, typed in Python and then the name of the file. So that would be the argument variable that we pass in. So line 3 that we have here unpacks argv here, so that rather than holding all the arguments, it gets assigned to 4 variables you can work with. All right, so that means once we run our code file, we would then here first of all insert the script as a first variable, and then we can continue it like with first, second, third, for example. So we see additional argument variables that we want to pass in, which will then be printed out in separate rows here. And actually, instead of calling it features, this is actually not called features, but we would call it a module. And we import modules, so different libraries, so to speak. All right, so let's continue and actually run our code. And let me just clear the screen for now. So we're gonna write Python 3.6 to run that version. Then the file name, the name of the script. Oh, let me just save this first of all, like this. All right. And then first, second, third. Let's confirm. So, and now we can compare our results here. So the script is called, that's the name of the script, exercise 13.py. The first variable is first, the second variable is second, and your third variable is third. So exactly those arguments here that we passed in are basically assigned and printed out. And that's how we can provide or work with those kind of arguments, those kind of command line arguments that we can provide. So let's run it again with some other input. Instead of typing the specific Python version, so 3.6, we can just type out Python 3, and then it's going to use basically the latest version of Python, which currently is Python 3.9. So here again, the first one, that's important that we actually pass in the name of the script to be executed, and then the other ones are just different this time. And again, it basically uses the variables here, the argument variables, and prints them out in the respective lines. Right, let's continue and run it again with some other variables. So in this case, apple, orange, and grapefruit. And again, apple, orange, and grapefruit are assigned here and printed out. All right, however, if we don't provide the correct number of arguments, we will encounter an error. So if we type out Python 3.6 exercise 13.py first, second, so note that we only pass in 3 command line arguments instead of 4. So here the fourth one, which is called third here, is empty. In this case, if we try to run it, then we'll encounter an error because it says here it expected 4 command line arguments, but it only got 3 because these are exactly the 3 that we provided here, and we need to add an additional one so that it's the correct number. All right, so that's a curriculum for this exercise. Let's continue with the study rules. So the first exercise here is to try to give fewer than 3 arguments to our script. So that's basically what we just did, but let's just do it again with another example. So first of all, the name of the file, and then let's just type one additional one. And then we get the error here that we only got 2 command line arguments, but our script expected 4, so that's why we get the error. So let's write a script that has fewer arguments and one that has more. Make sure you give the unpacked variables good names. All right, so let's update this here, and let's first of all just add 1 fewer command line arguments. So I'm just going to remove this here. So now we only have 3 command line arguments that we are working with, and also 3 print statements. So if we save this here and head back to our terminal, we can run that again. So by typing out Python 3 followed by the name of the script, and then of course we can provide 2 more arguments. So let's say first and second, and then we have those 3 lines as opposed to those 4 lines being printed out. And then let's just undo that real quick, and let's provide an additional argument here. So I'm going to call it 4. So we have 5 command line arguments in total. And now we can say the 4th variable is, and then of course we would call that 4th. All right, and let's go back and run that one more time. And in this case, we would say exercise 13.py as the first command line argument, first, second, third and fourth. And now we have a total of 5 print statements that are printed out. Okay, so the next one is combine the input with argv to make a script that gets more input from a user. Don't overthink it, just use argv to get something and input to get something else from the user. Okay, so we can basically build on top of this here to print out the first few lines, and then we can use input. We can ask the user for some text, and we can store that in, for example, a variable called user input, and then let's just print it out using printf here. So your input was, and let's use curly braces, and in here we can then use that variable. Let's save this up. Let's send it back. And as previously, we first of all provide those this total of 5 command line arguments, so the name of the script, and then 4 additional ones. Let's press enter, and now it prints out as before those 5 print statements, and now it's asking us for some additional text. So let's just provide string here, press enter, and then it's printing out the input was. This is great. All right, so, and then the last exercise here is remember that modules give you features. Modules, remember this because we will need it later. All right, so we have modules that we work with. So here, for example, a sys module, and we can then provide here, or basically import from such a module additional functionalities like this argv list that we are using to basically work with command line arguments. Let's take a look at some common student questions. The first one is when I run it, I get value error, need more than one value to unpack. Remember that an important skill is paying attention to details. If you look at what you should see section, you see that I run the script with parameters on the command line. You should replicate how I ran it exactly. So we need to always make sure that when we run the script, we provide those command line arguments, and we need to provide the right number. What's the difference between argv and input? The difference has to do with where the user is required to give input. If they give you a script inputs on the command line, which is what we did here, then you use argv. If you want them to input using the keyboard while the script is running, then use the input function here. So that's basically, here we combine both. We use the command line arguments to provide input through the command line, and then here we used the input method to basically get some user input when the script is running. Other command line arguments, strings. Yes, they come in as strings even if you type numbers on the command line. Use int to convert them, just like with int input. Yeah, so we always need to make sure that, of course, if we type this out here, it would be considered a string, so text. But then if we provide numbers, we would need to convert it if we want to, for example, do some calculations based on that. How do you use the command line? You should have learned to use it very quickly and fluently by now, but if you need to learn it at this stage, then read the command line crash course at the end of the book. All right, so I mean, we learned about that previously, how to, for example, create a new directory and navigate to the directory, which is what we did in one of the previous videos. But yeah, the appendix can be helpful to take a closer look at it. I can't combine argv with input. Don't overthink it, just step 2 lines at the end of the script that uses input to get something and then print it. From that, start playing with more ways to use both in the same script. Alright, that's basically what we did here in one of the previous exercises. Why can't I do this? Input question mark equals x, because it's backward to how it should work. Do it the way I do it and it will work. So here we can see how we would do it properly. We use the input function and we type in some text that we want to display, and when the input is provided, it's always assigned to the value on the left side, which is this variable here, and from here we can then start using it. So it's always the input that we get on the right side is assigned to the variable on the left. So in this case here, we if we try to do that, then we would try to assign x to input, and x is not defined and it doesn't make sense to assign that to input. So that is why we have to flip it around basically. Alright, and that's it for exercise 13. And see you guys in the next video for the next exercise.